Welcome to Flipped Classroom. Today's lesson will cover the concept of assumptions. In Toulmin's three-part structure of an argument, he talks about the claim, and that's what you are going to prove, and that's usually listed as your thesis statement. Support, that's your evidence, the materials that the arguer uses to convince an audience that his or her claim is sound. And the warrant. This is more commonly known as the assumption, and that is a belief or principle that is taken for granted. There are two types of assumptions. The unstated assumption, which will not be obvious. And this is used if the speaker or writer believes that the audience already shares the assumption, so there's no need to express it. And then there are stated assumptions. This is when you have a hostile or a doubtful audience, an audience that may not automatically agree with your issue. The speaker or writer may decide to state the assumption to emphasize its importance or even argue for its validity. Here's an example of an unstated assumption. If you are claiming that you should call 911 and your support is, I just saw a fire coming from my neighbor's house with people inside. You don't really have to come out and say, if you see a house on fire with people inside, you should call 911 to get help. That is something that you assume to do. People are in danger, you call for help. So let's look at some situations when you'd want to leave the assumption unstated. One, it's obvious, you need not to express it, as in the example with the 911 call. Or the writer or speaker might want to conceal this assumption, hoping that the audience will overlook its weakness. So here are some examples of obvious assumptions. Mothers love babies. Killing innocent people is wrong. First come, first served. Think of that last assumption, first come, first served. Can you think of a situation where possibly that assumption would not prevail? Possibly an emergency room, when they treat the person that is most critically ill, even if that person was not the first to arrive at an emergency room? In this case, you would not state the assumption. So why should we rely on assumptions? Because the audience will make the same connection between the support and the claim that the author does. Let's take another example. Let's say you're claiming that the popular vote should replace the Electoral College as the means of electing president. That became a really big issue with the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump election, as well as Al Gore and George Bush. And let's say your support is, the popular vote gives each voter one vote for president. In this case, the assumption is the president should be elected by a system that gives each voter one vote. So is accepting the assumption important? Yes. The audience has to accept the assumption in order to accept the author's claim based on the evidence provided. So let's take a look. Here's your claim. A picture ID should be required for eligibility to vote. Your support would be picture IDs would cut down on voter fraud. To make this work, the audience would have to accept the assumption that a requirement that cuts down on voter fraud should be implemented. Let's take a look at assumptions in controversial claims. Let's say someone is claiming abortion is murder of an unborn child. In this controversial case, the assumption is a fetus is a child from the moment of conception. This can be problematic because in such a controversial issue, only part of your audience would believe a fetus is a child from the moment of conception, and the other part of your audience would not see a fetus as a child. Many on the other side of the abortion debate would not accept this assumption. Therefore, they would not accept the claim. So disagreements on emotionally charged issues are very difficult to resolve. Why? Those underlying assumptions are based on firmly held beliefs that are resistant to change. Let's take a look at this assumption that in the visual argument here. It's claiming women have come a long way in gaining more liberties, power, and respect. And you'll see support in the picture of the modern woman who's very happy, and she's no longer serving powerful men coffee as the image in the back. In this case, the assumption is being permitted to smoke cigarettes is a significant sign of female liberation. Of course, not everybody would buy into that assumption. They would not see smoking cigarettes as giving women more freedom. This argument is based on that assumption. Let's take another example. If your claim is a peaceful protest has a greater chance of being successful, And your support is everyone at this protest was holding positive signs and singing as they marched to the state capitol. Your assumption would be honorable people respect life and property. Could protesters still be honorable if they destroy life or property? As you see in this picture here of the statue of Saddam Hussein being toppled in Iraq. So in review, a Toulmin argument will have a claim, which is your thesis, support, which is your evidence that comes in your body paragraphs, and there's a warrant, an assumption, the stated or often unstated belief that the audience must accept for the claim to be valid. Thank you for joining me today in Flipped Classroom.